Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into the shadows of Westminster Abbey, where one royal tomb has refused to open its mouth for more than 4 centuries. The night outside smells of rain and candle wax, the kind of scent that makes history feel alive again. Somewhere beneath those ancient stones lies the coffin of a queen wrapped in lead, sealed so perfectly that not even time itself has dared to touch her. They call her the Virgin Queen, the woman who ruled without a husband, who tamed empires with words sharper than any sword. But what if that silence history worships wasn't purity, but fear? What if the secret buried under that lead could shatter everything England believed about her beloved queen? Don't worry, we're only visiting her tonight. You won't have to stay down there with her, though honestly, I'm not sure you'd survive the smell if you did. Some say her tomb still breathes when the candles flicker. Maybe it's just the draft. Or maybe it isn't. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from right now, and what time is it in your corner of the world? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. London's night is thick with fog. You hear the bells of Westminster Tower drifting through the cold, damp air, each toll stretching out, echoing and dissolving into the darkness like the heartbeat of this ancient city. The wet cobblestone streets mirror the faint yellow lamps, where a few tourists still take quiet photos of the Abbey, tucking their hands back into their coats and exhaling small clouds of white breath. And just beneath those stones, only a few meters down, lies the place where people believe Queen Elizabeth I still rests, or, as some prefer to whisper, still keeps watch. You walk through the black iron gates of Westminster Abbey, where every wall seems soaked with old prayers. The air inside is heavy with candle wax and the dust of old oak. Here, time doesn't move forward. It coils around the stone statues. A visitor unknowingly steps on the slab marked Mary Tudor, Elizabeth's sister, without realizing that beneath that name lie 2 women who spent their lives as enemies, now resting side by side, a paradox as delicate as it is bitter, and the beginning of one of England's longest-running mysteries. A tour guide once leaned in, voice low like a ghost story. The Queen's coffin is made of lead, sealed completely. If it were ever opened, not only poison gas would escape, but perhaps history itself. He laughed softly, thinking he was just trying to sell more tickets for the night tour, but in the cold silence of the Abbey, the words suddenly felt real. Lead, the same metal Elizabeth smeared on her face for 40 years to keep her skin porcelain white, now serves as the final material guarding her last secret. Sometimes, history really does have a terrifying sense of dark humor. And in that stillness, your mind begins to wander. What makes people seal a body for 4 centuries? Part ritual, part fear, and the rest, pure obsession with legend. Elizabeth wasn't just a woman, she was an era, the Golden Age itself. She defeated the Spanish Armada, held England firm through storms of war and religion. A woman without husband or child, ruling like a deity. Her existence defied both prejudice and patriarchy. Perhaps that's why the English never wanted to see her as a corpse. They wanted her to remain a living statue. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth rejected marriage for power or for something far more personal. Some believe she feared love itself, haunted by the memory of her mother, Anne Boleyn, who was beheaded by her own father, King Henry VIII. Others propose a bolder theory, that she might have been born with a physical abnormality or a condition that made her unable to bear children. Spanish ambassadors once described her as unusually tall, with a deep voice and a beauty so cold it seemed unreal. But no medical proof has ever been allowed, simply because no one has ever been permitted to open the tomb, and so the mystery remains intact, sealed like wax around a candle's flame. You picture yourself standing before that tomb. Candlelight flickers over the carved inscription, Elizabeth Regina, 1533 to 1603. The pale stone glows faintly, cool as the white powder she once used. Perhaps if you touched it, you might even hear the faint metallic echo of the lead beneath. They say lead slows decay, but for Elizabeth, perhaps it preserved something else, the image she built so carefully, the woman who belonged to no one, who never aged, an eternal emblem of power and solitude. Few know this detail. When the Queen lay dying, she refused to lie down for the last 17 days. Her ladies-in-waiting said she stood almost constantly, leaning on a wall, eyes sunken, lips murmuring without rest. When urged to lie in bed, she whispered, "If I lie down, I shall never rise again." It might have been a metaphor, but from a woman who lived her whole life inside steel corsets and behind a mask of white lead, it sounded like prophecy. And indeed, once she collapsed, no one ever saw Elizabeth's real body again. Some said it was because her body had been deformed by lead poisoning, her hair gone, teeth fallen, skin cracked and gray. Others insisted it was mere gossip, embroidered later. Scholars still debate whether lead toxicity truly killed her. Medical records of the time are too vague, but one fact is clear. Her lead coffin was sealed unusually fast, while other monarchs had public funerals with open processions. For Elizabeth, only a handful of confidants were allowed a final look. Then the lead lid was lowered, and every gaze was forced to turn away. If you think this sounds like a horror movie, you're not wrong. Except this one has been playing for 420 years without an ending. In the early 20th century, a team of archaeologists proposed opening her tomb to compare DNA with Mary Tudor, buried in the same vault, to study royal genetics. The British government refused, citing religion and the sanctity of the Abbey. But everyone knew the truth. They were protecting the myth, not the body, for if the Virgin Queen were ever found to be otherwise, the national symbol might crumble overnight. You can't help but think how strange it is. In an age when we can analyze dust on the moon, there are still secrets kept as tightly as in the 16th century. Westminster Abbey feels like a vast glass cabinet, history displayed neatly, locked with a key that doesn't exist. Abbey keepers have even whispered that sometimes, over the years, the stone above Elizabeth's tomb seemed to sink slightly, as if something beneath were shifting. The North 6 steps were meant to convey that a sovereign. They fixed it, of course, and everyone laughed it off, just the humidity. But one old warden once murmured, "Sometimes we shouldn't joke with those who do not wish to be forgotten." The voice in your head slows. Suddenly all the fragments, lead, powder, corsets, and vows of chastity link together like cold metal chains. Elizabeth may have lived and died inside the same invisible armor, an armor called image. She understood too well how fragile female power was in her time. One wrong smile, one visible scar, one exposed secret, and the blade could fall as it once fell on her mother. So she built a legend, a mask of lead and will, and even in death, she never let anyone take it off. You smile faintly, half in admiration, half in unease. Perhaps, deep down, Elizabeth I was never truly immortal, as her people believed. She simply understood humanity too well, how we need perfect stories to believe in. So she left them one, and hid the rest behind lead. It's not so different from us, covering dark circles with concealer or switching off our phones when we don't want to face someone. It's just another game of another century. A queen who understood social media before it existed, except her filters were made of white lead and a golden crown. And now, as you stand in that darkness, the bells of Westminster ring again. The sound rolls beneath the vaulted ceiling like the enormous heartbeat of time itself. The line between Elizabeth's myth and her human truth blurs, like her white makeup melting under candlelight. Perhaps she's still there, not waiting to be uncovered, but reminding us that power, beauty, and fear are often just 3 layers of the same lead. You exhale softly. Tomorrow, when daylight returns, people will line up again to smile for photos before her statue, tagging them with Virgin Queen. But tonight, with only the fog and the bells for company, you understand something deeper. Some secrets don't need to be unearthed to exist. They just need to be heard. The final bell fades, and a chill wind from the River Thames slips through the cracks of the chapel door. You shiver. In the trembling candlelight, the marble statue of Elizabeth seems to gaze downward, her half-closed eyes listening still to the whispers of the living world. Perhaps it's here, in this sacred hush, that you finally understand how every story begins, not with triumph, but with a quiet, private fear, the fear of loving in a world where love could cost you your head. When Elizabeth was just a little girl, she once saw her father, King Henry VIII, ride across the palace courtyard with that same cold, imperious stare history remembers. Around him marched men with spears, and behind them, a cart carrying the body of Anne Boleyn, once his queen, now her mother. The severed head hidden inside a small wooden chest. That image carved itself deep into the child's mind, a scar no crown could ever erase. You can almost imagine the look in her eyes, the moment love and death fused into one. From that day, Elizabeth learned what it meant to be a king's daughter, how to hide your heart better than anyone else. You take a breath, hearing the wind sigh between the stone columns. Every sound feels like a fragment of memory. As she grew older, Elizabeth was sent to live under the guardianship of Catherine Parr, Henry's last wife, a gentle, educated woman who taught her languages, politics, philosophy. For a time, the house felt safe, but safety never lasted long in Tudor England. Thomas Seymour, Catherine's new husband, began to show an interest that crossed every boundary. Records say he crept into Elizabeth's chamber at dawn, laughing, teasing, playing with the 13-year-old princess in a haze of shame and fear. When the scandal surfaced, Catherine sent the girl away, and from that day, Elizabeth learned her first hard lesson about powerful men. They speak of protecting you, but they're often the very reason you need protection. Historians still debate whether Thomas Seymour truly tried to seduce her or was simply a drunken nobleman playing a reckless game. But whatever the truth, that incident built the invisible wall Elizabeth carried all her life. You could serve her at court, kneel before her, even make her laugh, but no one ever truly touched her heart. They called her the Virgin Queen, but perhaps that title was just another name for someone who had mastered the art of never needing to trust. Under the golden light reflected from the old tombstones, you imagine her sitting in a cold stone chamber, holding a letter from Robert Dudley, the one man who could still make her smile. He was her childhood friend, her mirror in a world of masks. When Elizabeth became queen, she made him Master of the Horse, a modest title that meant one extraordinary privilege. He could be near her every day. The court whispered. Europe gossiped. Elizabeth replied only with that measured, secret smile. I need loyalty, not a husband. Then came the morning of 1560. News swept through London. Amy Robsart, Robert Dudley's wife, had been found dead at the foot of the stairs, neck broken. No witnesses. Some said it was suicide, others said an accident. But rumors spread like smoke that Dudley had pushed her, clearing the path to marry the Queen. From that moment, the dream of a royal wedding froze forever in suspicion. You can almost hear that story as a melody cut short. A love trapped in ice. Elizabeth kept Dudley close, showered him with lands and titles, but never let him step closer again. Once, at a banquet, she said, I shall have one husband, the Kingdom of England, a sentence both proud and unbearably lonely. And perhaps in some cruel way she succeeded. She made her very body part of her empire. The candle in your hand trembles. Its light glints off the marble, and Elizabeth's stone face seems to shift, cold one moment, weary the next. People said that in her final years she no longer recognized herself in the mirror. Decades of white lead had blistered her skin, turned her lips purple, her breath metallic, yet instead of stopping, she added more. Like a modern soul addicted to her own illusion, once a maid accidentally dropped her powder case before the Queen. Elizabeth looked at her for a long moment and whispered, If you see me imperfect, then I am no longer queen. He can't help but laugh softly. The line sounds hauntingly familiar. Today we'd call it image pressure, but in the 16th century Elizabeth lived its most merciless version. Every morning she endured the ritual, servants tightening her corset, layering the lead paste, painting crimson cheeks, fixing a wig heavy as armor. It was both cruelty and consecration. A woman crafting her power by concealing her flesh, a queen forged from metal and will. Modern historians still dispute what killed her: kidney failure from lead, deep melancholy, or simple exhaustion after 40 years of rule. But what confounds them most is that eerie detail: she stood for 17 days, refusing to lie down. Some believe she feared nightmares. Others say it was a ritual to resist death. Whatever the reason, when she finally fell, the court scrambled to find an heir. In a twist worthy of tragedy, the crown passed to James VI of Scotland, the son of her greatest enemy, Mary Stuart. You whisper into the dark. History never blushes, does it? A woman who spent her life preventing another bloodline from replacing hers was succeeded by that very blood. Fate sometimes writes better scripts than any playwright. Yet even in that irony, Elizabeth won because she controlled the one thing that outlived her. How the world would remember her. From the 17th century onward, the image of the Virgin Queen became eternal branding. The porcelain white face, the cold eyes, the radiant ruff collar, hung in galleries, printed on coins, etched into ships, and stamped on an entire era, the Elizabethan age. No one truly knew who she was beneath the powder, yet all believed in her myth. Perhaps that's why no one dares to open the tomb. If the raw truth were ever revealed, the porcelain statue worshipped for centuries might crack. You take a slow step back, your voice echoing softly in the vast chamber. Perhaps silence is how she continues to reign. It sounds like a joke, but the more you think about it, the truer it feels. Her death didn't end the Tudor dynasty with a mournful bell, but with a silence that never stopped. People say that whenever something great happens in England, the candle by Elizabeth's grave flickers strangely. Science blames drafts, humidity, pressure. But you know, there are things science can explain, yet the soul still prefers another story. You lift your gaze toward the statue. The candlelight seems to curve her lips into a faint smile, half proud, half ironic. Perhaps if she could hear how her story is still told across the centuries, she would smile just like that, not confirming, not denying, letting the world guess forever. A flawless PR strategy that outlived her by 400 years. Outside, Big Ben strikes 12. The fog thins. Moonlight spills through the high stained glass windows, falling across the marble tomb. You stand still, listening to your own breath mingling with that 1,000-year silence. Maybe you'll never know the truth, and maybe you don't need to, because sometimes it's the things left unopened that makes history feel alive. Elizabeth I may have died long ago, but her legend still wakes here with you in this long English night. The last bell fades away like a thin wisp of smoke, leaving behind a strange stillness, as if London itself were holding its breath. Outside, fog cloaks the statues, drifts over the abbey roof, and turns everything into a blurred painting. Inside, there's only the soft echo of footsteps on stone, the sigh of wind through the stained glass windows, and the haunting sense that if you were to whisper, your voice might travel all the way back to the 16th century. You touch the cold surface of the tomb, and the story inside your mind unfurls again. Half dream, half memory. You picture Elizabeth in her final years, a woman who had lived too long, ruled too long, until she could no longer believe in dying the ordinary way. Servants whispered that she feared mirrors, feared daylight, feared even birdsong. She spent her last days in a dark chamber, surrounded by candles, thick curtains drawn to banish every ray of sun. How ironic, you think, that the woman once called the bright star of England ended her life in darkness. Can you imagine that spring morning of 1603 when the news spread? The Queen is gone. There was no grand funeral procession like Henry VIII, no trumpets, no marching soldiers, only a small, silent cortege carrying a lead-sealed coffin toward Westminster. They say the scent of lavender and camphor was so thick it made people cover their faces. Those who lowered the coffin were ordered not to look, not to speak, not to touch. And when molten lead was poured to seal the vault, it hissed softly, the sound of metal whispering its last secret to legend. Historians still argue over that detail. Some claim the full lead casing was ritual preservation, but older records hint it was done for special reasons. Those reasons, of course, were never written down. You see, history is clever that way. Like a good lawyer, it always says just enough to keep itself innocent. And so, for over 400 years, no one dared to open the tomb. In 1810, during the Abbey's restoration, workers accidentally found the entrance to Elizabeth and Mary's crypt. They saw two lead coffins stacked atop one another. According to notes, Elizabeth's lay above, larger, marked with the letters E.R., Elizabeth Regina. They didn't open it. One of them later wrote in his diary that when he touched the lead, He felt a strange temperature, not warm, not cold. The story spread, and since then, no one has ever tried again. Perhaps what people feared wasn't religion, it was the feeling that something down there might still be alive. You smile faintly. It sounds absurd, but in a place where every stone holds the echo of centuries, you start to understand why. In your mind, another scene appears. 1952. The British Institute of Archaeology proposed to exhume royal tombs to verify Tudor DNA. The plan was approved for all, except Elizabeth. The official reason: the structure of her tomb is too fragile, but everyone in the institute knew it was anything but fragile. Some whispered that Queen Elizabeth II herself had objected, saying, "Her peace shall not be disturbed." The peace of the dead, it seems, outweighed the pursuit of truth. He let out a quiet laugh, the kind that feels like an exhale, half helpless, half admiring. The history of England, after all, is a banquet where truth is never on the guest list. And Elizabeth I remains its queen of untold stories. You think of Mary Stuart, the cousin Elizabeth, imprisoned for 19 years before finally sending her to the executioner's block. One dead, one alive, yet both lie now in the same vault. Perhaps that was never coincidence. Some modern scholars believe Elizabeth herself arranged it as a gesture of final reconciliation. Others insist it was the decision of her successor, James VI, Mary's son. His way of declaring that the Stuart bloodline was the future, and Elizabeth merely the past, sealed in lead. And then, as fate would have it, that very choice bound the two rival queens together forever, twin ghosts of the same story. You walk slowly around the statue, your steps echoing softly. Each sound feels like the orbit of time itself. You imagine Mary, once radiant, once coerced, once begging for mercy, now lying beneath Elizabeth. Perhaps in silence they finally understand each other. Both women lived in a world built by men, where every choice they made was recorded by another's voice. In the candlelight, Elizabeth seems to tilt her head slightly, lips pressed tight as if guarding a secret. They say she never truly sleeps. Some visitors claim that during late-night vigils they've heard light footsteps at the far end of the corridor, steady, slow, stopping right before the tomb. Maybe it's the wind, maybe imagination, yet each time one candle near the grave goes out. You're not superstitious, but hearing those tales you realize some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Not because they're dangerous, but because they're more beautiful unsolved. Like Elizabeth herself, who chose silence over explanation. When ambassadors asked why she never married, she replied, "I have married England," a line that was both myth and armor, and perhaps her one true confession. Scholars today still divide over her. Some call her Europe's greatest stateswoman, a woman who knew that marriage meant surrendering power. Others see her as pathologically lonely, obsessed with control, sacrificing love and humanity alike. No answer is entirely right. The truth likely lives somewhere in between, where a woman used solitude as her weapon to survive. You stop before the row of flickering candles. In the 16th century, women were taught to be meek, devout, and fertile. Elizabeth did the opposite. No husband, no child, but she turned an entire nation into her legacy. She made empires bow, made her people fear her and worship her all at once. And even in death, she held what few ever could: the right to remain silent. No historian, no monarch, no man has ever touched that body. Perhaps that is her final victory. He smiles softly. In truth, it isn't so different from our modern world. Everyone has their version, online, filtered, edited, curated. And everyone wants that version to live forever, even when they're exhausted behind the screen. Elizabeth was simply our classic prototype, the one who used lead instead of filters. Outside, the wind rises again. You hear rain tapping against the abbey roof, the sound dripping down into the crypt like time itself striking the lead below. You close your eyes, and for a moment you can almost hear a breath from far away. Whether imagination or memory of stone, you understand one thing. Every legend begins with a name and ends in silence. You step back, gazing one last time at the tomb. In that moment, you finally understand why no one dares to open it. Not from fear of defying religion, but of breaking the story. If the lid were lifted, if all that remained inside were ordinary dust, the myth would crumble, and humanity once again would lose its faith that someone once rose above the limits of flesh. You smile faintly, a mix of sorrow and gratitude. Perhaps Elizabeth deserves her rest, not because she was a queen, but because she embodies the solitude every strong soul must one day pay for. Her silence is no longer avoidance, it is inheritance. A reminder that sometimes the greatest power you can wield is to say nothing at all. And as you turn to leave, the bells of Westminster ring once more, low, long, like the sigh of history itself. You step out into the London fog where lamplight shimmers across the wet streets. The wind carries a trace of lavender, the same scent they burned at her funeral. And somewhere in that darkness, you can almost sense her smile. The smile of a woman who knew that even death could not stop the world from talking about her. You pull your collar up and glance at the silver grass sky. When the final bell fades, only one sound remains. The quiet beating of your heart, echoing to the rhythm of 420 years of silence. You step out through the stone doors of Westminster Abbey, and at once, London's mist wraps around you like a damp scarf. The air outside feels different, more alive, yet still carrying the ancient chill you've just touched. Red buses glide past, headlights streaking across the fog. Voices echo from the nearby square. Everything looks absurdly modern when you've just come from a place where time has stood still for 4 centuries. There's a strange truth about London. No matter how far you walk, history's ghosts walk with you. They just change their clothes. You stroll along the River Thames, the same river that watched the rise and fall of the Tudor dynasty. Streetlights cast golden ripples over the water, turning it into a ribbon of liquid metal. Across the river stands Whitehall Palace, the very heart of Elizabeth I's power, where she held banquets, signed death warrants, and sometimes stood by the window, looking down at the water in silence. People still whisper that on foggy nights, a woman in white can be seen by the window, red hair falling loose, peacock feather fan in hand. Perhaps it's a trick of the light, or perhaps it's the city's memory, one that refuses to forget. You stop by the railing, thinking about that strange kind of power. In Elizabeth's century, England was just a small island, dismissed by the great powers of Europe. Yet somehow that woman turned her own loneliness into a national strategy. She refused to marry the King of Spain, refused alliances with France, refused anything that might bind England's independence. She herself became the embodiment of her nation, self-contained, unyielding, proud to the point of solitude, and maybe it was that very solitude that allowed England, for the first time, to to stand on its own. You think of the Great Sea Battle of 1581, the clash with the Spanish Armada that made Elizabeth's name ring through history. When Spain's massive fleet advanced, people thought England would fall. But the winds shifted, a storm rose, and England's smaller ships, fighting under the Queen's banner, emerged victorious. Some called it a miracle, some called it strategy. Elizabeth simply said, "I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king," a line so sharp and wry that even Europe choked on it. Historians still debate whether that storm was divine intervention or just weather's whim, but regardless, Elizabeth turned it into myth. She didn't just win by cannons, she won by words. She knew the world didn't crave facts, it craved a story, and she gave them one. In an age before mass media, Elizabeth mastered public relations with nothing but herself. A 16th century influencer, if you like. You smile. The river before you feels like a mirror reflecting two worlds, the present and the past. Somewhere beneath the surface might still lie the wrecks of Tudor ships, buried in mud like sunken dreams. Yet, on the bank, cars hum and music drifts from a riverside pub. Life goes on. Just as Elizabeth once turned the decay around her into the background music for her own eternal performance. You keep walking, crossing Lambeth Bridge toward Hampton Court Palace. Night deepens, the air grows sweet, damp, and cold. When the old iron gates appear under the amber glow of the lamps, you feel as if you've slipped backward into the 16th century. This was once Henry VIII's palace, but under Elizabeth, it became the stage for her grandest pageants. People said she could stand in the center of a hall for 3 hours, smiling without blinking, speaking, observing, never missing a single gesture. No one ever knew what she truly thought, wrote a French ambassador, and perhaps she liked it that way. Inside the Great Hall, you can almost see the shimmer of hundreds of candles against the walls. Hear the soft strum of the lute, the clink of silver, the polite laughter of courtiers. And yet, at the center of all that sound, Elizabeth was the silence. Beneath the dozens of pounds of silk and steel corsets, under the gown that stole her breath, she still stood tall, flawless, untiring. They said that at the end of a long banquet, when everyone else drooped with fatigue, she would glide from table to table, raising her cup, recalling each guest's last remark with perfect accuracy. You might call it a remarkable memory, or perhaps the survival skill of a lonely soul, remembering everything so she would never have to trust anyone. You know that Elizabeth forbade anyone at court to see her unpainted. Anyone who entered her chambers before she was fully made up was immediately dismissed or reassigned. Maybe she feared being seen vulnerable, or feared that one glimpse of reality might shatter the myth she had built. Like a movie star refusing to appear without perfect lighting, Elizabeth understood the value of illusion. Modern scholars still debate whether she truly suffered from androgen insensitivity syndrome, a condition where one carries XY chromosomes yet develops a female body. There's no medical proof, only rumor, but the rumor spread deep. Old Spanish dispatches claimed the Queen does not bleed monthly and her physicians are confounded. Whether propaganda or truth, the whisper only magnified her mystery. And perhaps that very mystery was the secret to her immortality. In a world ruled by men, a woman could only survive if no one ever knew for certain who or what she really was. You leave the palace, following the red crumb brick wall. The night thickens, the scent of wet earth and leaves hangs in the air. You imagine Elizabeth standing here once and wonder which way she looked. Toward London, glittering with power, or toward the dark, open fields beyond, where no one demanded she be anyone at all? Either way, she stood between two worlds, one of rule and one of freedom she would never touch. A black cat darts across the path and you laugh. Perhaps she sent a spy, you murmur. It's your second joke of the night. But it helps dispel that strange feeling that you're walking beside a spirit rather than a memory. You realize that Elizabeth's power didn't lie in her crown, but in her ability to make people feel she's still present, long after only marble and ashes remain. Back in central London, you duck into a small cafe near Parliament Street and order a cup of hot tea. Steam rises, scented with bergamot, and for a moment you feel as if you're sitting in that cold stone room at Whitehall, across from a red-haired woman whose eyes burn like candlelight. If she could speak to you, perhaps she'd laugh and say, "Don't believe everything historians write about me. They were men." Then, with that dry wit of hers, she'd add, "And men always think they understand women." You laugh out loud, startling the waiter, but you don't explain. How could you tell him you just heard the Queen's voice in your head? When you step outside, dawn is breaking. The pale silver light of morning glows on Westminster's Gothic spires. The city resumes its rhythm. Yet, inside you, the story still continues. You realize Elizabeth I isn't merely a historical figure. She's a test of humanity's faith and immortality. When everything else fades, the story remains. And as long as her tomb stays sealed, the story will keep being told. You glance back toward the Abbey one last time. The first light hits the stained glass, scattering into a shimmer like a silver crown. Perhaps, somewhere beneath those stones, Elizabeth is smiling. Not the proud smile of a monarch, but the quiet smile of someone who knows that silence, held long enough, can make the whole world listen. You walk on, your footsteps blending with the city's awakening hum, and within you the story remains, unfinished, needing no conclusion, just the understanding that sometimes the things left unsaid are the ones that echo the longest. The morning mist still hangs low over the Thames as you make your way toward Westminster Bridge. The river mirrors the pale gray sky, street lights scattering across its surface like fading embers of memory. The city is waking up, the distant rumble of trains, the cawing of crows around the bell tower, the smell of coffee drifting from small cafes opening their doors. Yet amid all this rush of life, you carry something quietly strange inside you, as if one story still hasn't finished being told, as if some part of Elizabeth I is still waiting, somewhere in the old corners of this city. You stop at the square near Queen Victoria's statue, where the wind off the river carries a sharp chill. People usually remember Elizabeth as a symbol of power, but few think of something else, the loneliness that marked her final years. History books say that in old age, she would sit for hours in a dark room, surrounded by mirrors covered with black cloth. She no longer wished to see her own fate. Once a lady-in-waiting dared to ask, "Your Majesty, why not uncover the mirrors?" Elizabeth replied, "Because I no longer wish to face the one who betrayed me, time." That line, you think, feels disturbingly familiar. In our age, how many of us are still running from ourselves, only with filters and ring lights instead of black veils? Perhaps Elizabeth wasn't so different from a modern influencer. The whole world saw her face, but no one ever truly knew the person behind it. And when the candles went out, all that remained was a sigh and the faint scent of lead. Historians still argue over her true condition in those last years. Some records note her skin ulcerated, her hair fell out, her teeth loosened, the price of her poisonous cosmetics. Others suggest chronic lead poisoning, which eroded her memory and unbalanced her mind. Late 16th century court letters describe sudden bursts of rage, followed by eerie stretches of silence. And yet, amid that decline, Elizabeth remained astonishingly lucid in her duties, signing documents, issuing decrees, receiving ambassadors, as if the woman had already died and only the Queen remained. You picture Richmond Palace in the winter of 1602, when she could scarcely rise from bed. Outside, the Thames was frozen. Inside, candles burned day and night. Servants said she would stare into empty space as if conversing with invisible company. Sometimes she would chuckle softly. Sometimes she would weep without sound. One night, a courtier asked, "Your Majesty, what are you thinking?" Elizabeth answered, "I'm waiting for dawn, but it seems to have lost its way." That reply sounds both tragic and bitingly witty. A woman who once ruled half the world, now waiting for the sun to visit her. History, you think, always knows how to end its plays with irony. When she died on March 24, 1603, England fell into an uncanny silence. No bells, no mourning songs. Everything was conducted quietly, almost hastily. Some records even say her body was poorly embalmed for fear that toxins might escape. The attendants spoke of lavender, camphor, and resinous perfumes thick in the air, yet unable to mask a strange odor. Then the lead coffin was sealed and placed in a temporary vault at Whitehall Chapel before being moved to Westminster. But what catches your attention isn't the funeral itself, it's how people wrote about it. The records are vague, fragmented. No one describes the final preparations, and no witnesses were allowed near as the coffin was lowered. Modern scholars suspect something went wrong with the preservation process, forcing the court into secrecy. Others believe Elizabeth herself ordered that secrecy, to protect her image even in death. You look up at the Tower of Westminster and wonder, has anyone ever dared ask what truly remains beneath the lead? It sounds like a morbid question, but you understand. It's not about archaeology. It's about the human hunger to see what truth looks like once it's been sealed away. Perhaps they would find relics, perhaps only dust, or perhaps something stranger, something history itself doesn't want to see. Conspiracy theories from the 19th century claimed that Elizabeth never died at Richmond, that another woman was buried in her place. Some even imagined she fled to Ireland and lived in disguise. Ridiculous, perhaps, but you understand the need to believe it, because Elizabeth had turned herself into such a legend that people could not bear the thought of her simply dying. A legend cannot end with an ordinary death. You chuckle softly, the first light joke of this part, because honestly, who among us hasn't wished to be a legend at least once, even if only on Facebook? In truth, all that remains is the tomb bearing the inscription, "Partners in throne and grave, here rest two sisters, Elizabeth and Mary." A lovely line at first glance, but also a gentle dagger to Elizabeth's legacy. Mary, the cousin she once branded a traitor, the woman she condemned to death, now lies beside her. History, it seems, has an even darker sense of humor than any playwright. Scholars still debate whose decision it was, Elizabeth's or her successors. Some evidence suggests the Queen once told her courtiers, "Let Mary rest elsewhere, for I shall find no peace with her near." Yet James VI, Mary's son and Elizabeth's heir, deliberately buried them together, as if reclaiming justice for his mother. You imagine Elizabeth somewhere beneath the stones, grinding her teeth or laughing in that sharp, knowing way of hers. After all, if she once bested all of Europe, losing a little in death isn't much of a defeat. You turn toward the Thames. Morning light gleams silver on the water. If Elizabeth were alive, she might have liked this view. Cold, regal, metallic. People often said she had no heart. But perhaps that's what the world says about women who dare to live differently. They're remembered as iron, simply because they refused to bow. You laugh again, the second gentle joke, because you recall a meme. If you think your boss is demanding, imagine working for Elizabeth I. Indeed, the royal records show her as meticulous beyond belief, reviewing diplomatic letters, correcting spelling errors, even dictating what ambassadors should wear. Some call it obsessive control. You think of it more simply as the only way a woman could survive among political wolves. You wander down a narrow, moss-covered street. A small sign reads, "To St. Margaret's Church." Inside once hung a painting of Elizabeth holding a sword between two angels, her face serene, her eyes knowing everything. The painter was ordered to smooth the wrinkles before presenting it, proof that even power needs powder. You wonder if Elizabeth would be pleased to know that centuries later, people still talk about her flawless white skin, the same way we remember Marilyn Monroe for her red lipstick, ignoring the countless other stories that mattered more. History, after all, always keeps what's prettiest or easiest to digest. Outside Big Ben chimes again. Each note pulls you back toward the present, but the story clings to you like mist. And you realize, perhaps the reason her tomb remains sealed isn't religion or tradition, but a quiet pact between humans and memory. Let the things we need to believe stay asleep. You keep walking past rows of old houses, every window holding a piece of history, and suddenly you understand what's really guided you through this long night. It wasn't the mystery of the corpse or the curse of royalty, but the lesson in how humans choose to tell stories. Elizabeth I didn't rule only through power, she ruled through narrative. She wrote herself into history in a way no one has dared to revise. You stop in the street, gazing toward Westminster, bathed in the soft gold of morning. Her legend still stands there, untouched, sealed like that coffin of lead. And like all of humanity's greatest secrets, it will remain protected, not by locks, but by the fear that once truth is exposed, the magic will vanish. You exhale, murmuring to yourself, perhaps you really did win, Elizabeth, because even death hasn't silenced your name. And so, amid London's bustling morning, you realize the silence that has lasted 420 years was never about forgetting. It was an echo that never stopped, the whisper of a queen, still alive in every breath this city takes. The sun climbs higher, its light cutting through the mist and laying gold across the old rooftops. The city fully awakens, wheels turning, horns echoing, laughter rising like a different symphony from the stillness of the night before. Yet inside you, the echoes of the journey linger, as if you've just stepped out of a dream where time had no meaning. You glance back one last time toward Westminster, where the statue of Queen Elizabeth I stands tall in the morning glow. Her stone face seems to smile, though you can't tell whether it's pride or mischief, perhaps both. You turn into a small cafe near Parliament Square, order a coffee and take a seat by the window. Each sip of warmth pulls you a little closer to the present, though your mind still wanders to that sealed lead tomb. Something about it won't let you go, Not just curiosity, but the feeling that an invisible hand is guiding you deeper into her world. Maybe to understand why England has never dared to open Elizabeth's grave, one must remember what the world has forgotten. She was not merely a queen, but her own greatest creation. You open your notebook and jot down, Elizabeth, the woman who became her own myth. You chuckle softly. It would make a perfect video title. But to truly tell her story, you'd have to look past the powdered portraits, to the hidden fractures beneath that proud mask history has polished for centuries. Let's start with the smallest truth, the fear of being forgotten. Records from the royal archives show that in her final years, Elizabeth would stay awake through the night, reviewing her own speeches. She edited every line, adding flourishes of symbolism, then recited them before a mirror, as though preparing for one last performance. A courtier once wrote that she said, "Words shall be my final weapon when my body no longer obeys me." It sounds like something from the stage, but for Elizabeth, every moment on the throne was a stage. Modern historians still argue, was Elizabeth a master strategist, or simply an actress who became too perfect at her role? One side calls her the artist of politics, a woman who understood public psychology better than any man of her age. The other side claims she was a victim of performance, someone who lost herself inside her own creation. Perhaps both are true. You glance outside. Lines of tourists stream past, each raising a phone to capture her statue. How strange, 4 centuries gone, and people still reconstruct her image, only trading brushes for lenses. They don't come to mourn. They come to confirm that the myth still breathes. Every photo is a resurrection, not in blood, but in pixels. If Elizabeth could see it, you think, she'd laugh. After all, didn't she once say, "I know I have but the body of a weak and feeble woman," then pause, letting her court hold its breath. "But I have the heart and stomach of a king." You picture that moment. Thousands of eyes fixed on her, a small figure in silver armor, voice carried by the wind across Tilbury Field. Perhaps in that instant she understood the myth was complete. She didn't need children or heirs, only memory. You take another sip of coffee and smile. The first light joke of the morning. Sometimes, power is simply knowing when to stop speaking. But then you think about the other side of legend, absolute solitude. No one at court was ever allowed to call her by her name. Even those closest to her addressed her only as Your Majesty. During council meetings, she often kept her advisors waiting for hours, only to enter slowly, her gaze sharp as glass. It wasn't just ceremony, it was control. One minister once wrote, "When she was silent, we all grew smaller." You wonder how a person could make the world tremble, yet have no one to speak honestly to. Perhaps, when power reaches its peak, loneliness becomes the only companion left. Elizabeth understood that, and instead of fleeing it, she wore it like a crown. Few know this detail. In her final year, when her health declined, she ordered the royal musicians to stop playing sad melodies. "I do not wish for notes that remind me I once loved," she said. A simple sentence that held an entire life of restraint. Maybe she feared that music would peel away the mask she'd worn too long. From afar, the bells of Westminster toll again, deep, measured like the heartbeat of an aging city. You recall a curious story. In 1970, when technicians scanned the Abbey floor with ultrasound, Elizabeth's tomb gave off a faint vibration, as if metal softly humming. Engineers blamed resonance from the lead shell, though they couldn't rule out minor movement beneath. Newspapers sensationalized it. Crowds gathered. Days later, the government ordered the study to cease. No one mentioned it again. Of course, you know it was probably just physics. But sometimes it's just physics that keeps legends alive. Because as long as one person believes, the story never dies. Perhaps Elizabeth knew this too, that truth kills faith when it shines too clearly. So she left spaces wide enough for imagination to slip through. This second light joke crosses your mind. If Elizabeth lived today, she'd probably run the British government's PR department and do it brilliantly. A breeze drifts through the window, carrying a hint of lavender. You remember? That's the scent people say still lingers around her tomb. A caretaker once swore that every March 24th, the anniversary of her death, the fragrance fills the chapel, even when no flowers are present. Some call it hallucination. Others say it's just the ventilation. But you know, England never misses a chance to turn coincidence into legend. You scribble another note. Silence is the one form of power time cannot steal. And suddenly it clicks. That may be the real reason her tomb remains sealed, not out of religion or respect, but because that silence is the final chapter of her story. She knew that when people cannot see, they imagine. And in imagination, she will never age, never err, never fade. You laugh softly, the third light joke of the morning. That must be the most successful marketing campaign in human history. Your coffee is gone cold, yet you don't want to leave. Outside, pale sunlight touches the brick facades, making old buildings glow like burnished gold. Somehow, London still breathes in Elizabeth's rhythm. Between past and present, power and quiet, and you realize that England hasn't kept her tomb sealed out of fear of disturbing the dead, but out of fear of disturbing belief itself. Because myths need silence to survive. You stand, stepping out into the street. The city is awake now, but from somewhere far away the Westminster bells echo again. Steady, patient, like history bidding farewell. You don't turn back. You don't need to. You know that if you close your eyes, her pale face and pressed lips will still be there, in the London mist, in the wind, and in every unnoticed moment of silence. Perhaps, somewhere beneath the earth, inside that lead coffin, a dream still continues, a dream of power, of solitude, of how one woman conquered death itself through the story she wrote of her own life. And you know that someday, when the Westminster bells ring again, you'll remember this journey, not as a walk through history, but as a quiet conversation between you and a spirit who chose silence as the price of immortality. When you step out of the cafe, the London light has grown so clear it feels almost transparent, as if you could see straight through the air itself. The crowd rushes past, footsteps echoing on the damp pavement, and somewhere deep within the city, an ancient rhythm still breathes beneath the modern one. Westminster lies behind you now, yet in your mind those stone walls still stand, silent and heavy, like the memory of England itself. You walk toward the riverbank, where the wind carries the scent of damp water and cold metal. Sunlight drifts across the surface of the Thames, reflecting the outlines of old landmarks, the clock tower, the stone bridge, and further off, the steep rooftops of the Victorian age. Everything seems layered, as though centuries have been stacked one upon another, And between those layers, Elizabeth I still lingers, unwilling to fade away. You wonder if that's precisely why no one has ever dared to open her tomb. Not out of fear of a curse, but out of fear that once opened, time itself might collapse. That grave is the anchor between myth and reality. To disturb it might loosen the entire story. And even the most rational minds would rather keep a little magic than face a world stripped bare. Londoners still tell stories whenever a great royal event occurs, a coronation, a funeral, a national crisis. The candles around Elizabeth's tomb flicker strangely. During Queen Victoria's funeral, 4 candles reportedly extinguished at once. Some called it a blessing. She's welcoming her descendant, they said. Others whispered, not welcoming. Warning. You've heard these tales, but you don't know which parts to believe. In England, anything odd can be called tradition. A touch of the supernatural is always preserved, like spice in the recipe of history. Then, from across the river, the bells of St. Paul's begin to toll. You lift your eyes toward its great dome and think of another London. The city burned to ashes in the Great Fire of 1666. Flames had reached Westminster, threatening the royal tombs. But a sudden downpour saved the Henry VII chapel, where Elizabeth rests. People called it divine mercy. Centuries later, one skeptical scholar remarked, perhaps Elizabeth ordered the rain herself. You smile. A line both witty and perfectly British. It sounds exactly like her, always leaving you unsure whether to believe or not. Historians kept digging. In 2003, a research team petitioned the British government for permission to open Elizabeth's tomb to extract DNA, hoping to clarify her genetic link to Mary Tudor. It was an age of booming biotechnology, when people believed science could finally answer what legend could not. The reply from the royal household was a single sentence: her rest shall remain undisturbed. No explanation, no debate, just an ending written in stone. You sip the last drop of water from your bottle and wonder how many secrets are buried inside that one line. Perhaps for centuries more, no one will ever be allowed to open it. Because sometimes the real taboo isn't an action, it's the thought itself. Humanity needs untouchable things to remind itself it can still revere. You remember the moment you entered the Abbey last night, candlelight trembling across the cold walls. Even then, you felt something beyond time, the sense that Elizabeth had never truly left. And now, in broad daylight, among the clamor of life, that feeling hasn't faded. Perhaps that's why London still feels so alive. It isn't built only of stone, but of spirits that refuse to sleep. You sit on a bench by the river and write in your notebook. Elizabeth's tomb never needs to be opened. It is a half-closed door between humanity and legend. Step through it, and you lose a little magic, trading wonder for emptiness. You read it back and nod. That must be why people avoid the subject. No matter how advanced science becomes, it can't compete with the seduction of the unknown. Nearby, a couple stops to admire the Abbey. The woman asks, "She's still there, right?" The man smiles. "Of course. She never left." You overhear them, and warmth spreads through you. Some truths need no reasoning at all. You walk on toward St. James's Park. Trees are budding, birds are singing, and squirrels dart between the roots of oaks. Golden light floods the pond, reflecting a young blue sky, and you feel it. After all these centuries, this country still carries Elizabeth's likeness. Serene yet proud, ancient yet never old. Then you recall a small line from one of her letters. Silence sometimes holds more worth than any vow. Simple, yet it unlocks everything. She understood that words can be twisted, but silence cannot. It endures, an empty space into which everyone projects what they wish to see. Modern psychologists call it the Elizabeth effect, the tendency to idealize those who keep their private lives shrouded. From movie stars to politicians, the quieter they are, the deeper people imagine them to be. The concept began with her, the woman who turned silence into both her art of living and her art of dying. You chuckle, the first light joke of this chapter. If she lived today, she wouldn't need Instagram. Her absence would be her brand. A breeze ripples across the pond. You catch your reflection in the water, dim, shifting, and for a brief moment, it seems to change into another face, a woman with a high lace collar and eyes sharp with thought. You blink. The image dissolves, but the feeling lingers. Perhaps every soul retold enough times learns how to borrow the faces of those who listen. You leave the park as the sun tilts westward. The city changes color, rooftops glowing like molten gold in the dusk. You pass through the old quarter, near Tower Hill, where so many Tudor women met their end. Anne Boleyn, Catherine Howard, Lady Jane Grey. Different names, but one shadow binds them all, Elizabeth the survivor. Perhaps when night falls, their spirits call her name, not in reproach, but in recognition. She alone understood them. You whisper softly, "Survival is its own kind of guilt, isn't it, Elizabeth?" The wind carries the question away. No answer comes, though inside you already know it. Yes. Sometimes survival isn't a reward, but the sentence given to those who saw everything. Darkness descends. You turn toward Westminster once more. In the twilight, the Abbey rises like a vast ship anchored in a sea of fog. Inside, the lead coffin lies still, silent as eternity. Yet if you listen closely, between the bells, between the wind and the hum of the city, you might hear something faint. A breath, a whisper of silk, perhaps imagination, or perhaps Elizabeth herself, taking her name is still remembered, making sure her name is still remembered. You smile and murmur to the air, "Sleep well, Majesty. Don't worry, we're still listening." And you walk away, leaving behind the tolling of Westminster's bells, each chime stretching out like the final heartbeat of a legend. But you know it's not an ending, for with Elizabeth, nothing ever truly ends. Tonight, when the city drifts once more into shadow, her story will rise again, whispering from beneath the earth, weaving through London's breath, and continuing on, in silence. Night descends upon London once more. The sky is streaked with the pale gold of electric light, an illumination that no longer belongs to nature, but to human memory itself. You walk along the banks of the Thames, that old river which has watched dynasties rise and crumble, while its waters keep flowing, indifferent to power, indifferent to the stories humanity tries to preserve. The rippling sound of waves mingles with the wind, carrying the damp scent of ancient stone, and faintly, a whiff of lavender drifting from nowhere. The fragrance makes you shiver. It could be coincidence, or perhaps a greeting. From afar, the clock face of Big Ben glows faintly. The hands point toward midnight. You glance back in the direction of Westminster, where the great stone walls sleep in darkness. Somewhere within them, wrapped in cold lead and secrecy, lies a story no one dares to open. Perhaps still pulsing, not with a human heartbeat, but with memory itself. and you realize that every path in this city leads to the same destination, the silence of Elizabeth I. You sit on a stone bench, listening to the rhythm of the night. Taxis glide by, their hum steady as the breathing of the modern world. But in your mind, each sound becomes footsteps echoing on abbey floors. Perhaps that's why people still whisper that the Queen never truly left. Among the hundreds of ghost stories told by visitors, one stays with you. A guide once claimed that on a winter night, while closing the chapel, he found the metal door to the crypt ajar, and in that instant he heard the soft brush of silk against stone. He thought it was wind, yet somehow the air smelled of lavender. Of course, everyone laughed. In a city as old as London, ghosts are less frightening than rent, but deep down, everyone believes a little that some people never really die. They simply change shape, continuing to exist in collective memory. Elizabeth is one of them. You close your eyes and imagine the centuries rewinding. The cars vanish, the streetlights fade. 16th century London returns, dark, damp, thick with smoke and fog. At the city's heart, the Palace of Whitehall still glows with candlelight. In a vast chamber, Elizabeth stands before a mirror, her hands trembling slightly as attendants apply the lead-white paste to her face. Each brushstroke paints another layer of mask, concealing fatigue, fear, and solitude. You see her eyes in the glass, bright, sharp, and utterly alone. The eyes of someone who knows that power is not a gift, but a curse. You might think she was merely a woman obsessed with control, but place yourself in her time, a world where being born female was treated as an error of creation, a world where menstrual blood was called weakness, and men in court referred to women as political ornaments. In such an age, Elizabeth didn't just survive, she bent the world to her will. Every word, every glance was a calculated move on a battlefield. Some call her ruthless, but you understand. Sometimes ruthlessness is simply the cost of existing. They say that during council meetings, when an elder noble tried to interrupt her, Elizabeth would simply look at him in silence. That gaze alone made him falter, stammer an apology, and step back. She never had to shout. She ruled with silence, cold, deliberate, sharp as a hidden blade. Perhaps that same silence followed her into the grave. Historians still argue over her secret of rule. Some claim she governed through intellect, others through fear. But they agree on one thing: she understood human nature better than any monarch of her age. She once said, "My people love me not because I am perfect, but because I make them believe I am theirs." A sentence that sounds clever, but in truth, it defines every modern form of power. Humanity still hasn't escaped it. You smile, the first light joke of the night. If she lived today, she'd probably run a PR agency. A boat passes, sending gentle ripples across the river. You wonder if Elizabeth's deep understanding of people is precisely what kept her from trusting them. Perhaps that's why she chose solitude, why she chose to die alone and be sealed away forever. The thought fills you with a quiet sorrow, the kind reserved for yourself after a long, weary day. Her story makes you think of how people today also craft their masks, only now with photos, captions, and carefully arranged smiles. Suddenly you feel closer to her than ever. Because in the end, we all want the same thing: to be seen, to be remembered, and yet to keep one piece of ourselves untouched, safe from the world's grasp. You rise and walk along the Thames toward Tower Bridge. The wind grows stronger, the mist thickens. Each step feels like a descent into memory. Tower Hill lies ahead, the place where swords once gleamed and the blood of Tudor women stained the stones. You think of Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth's mother, who faced the executioner with her long hair loose and her gray gown flowing, bowing her head in silence. They say her last words were "God save the king," a prayer for the man who condemned her. And you realize that was where Elizabeth learned the language of silence, not weakness, but wisdom. You imagine Elizabeth visiting Tower Hill years later as queen. She halts her horse, stares at the stones where her mother's blood once fell, says nothing. Servants claim she only tightened her reins and turned away. No tears. Perhaps in that moment she made a vow. No one shall ever see me fall. You exhale, your chest heavy. The bridge lights shimmer like fallen stars on the river. Every legend begins with such a vow, a promise unheard, but remembered by history. They say when power and loneliness combine, they create a light that never fades. Elizabeth was that light, brilliant and solitary. Maybe that's why her tomb still draws people near, even sealed for centuries, because humanity will always be drawn to those who dared to live differently and who knew when to stay silent. You turn back toward London one last time. Tonight, the city glitters like a grand stage, and somewhere among the lights you glimpse, perhaps only in imagination, a woman in white, high lace collar brushing her chin, walking across a bridge, her gaze fixed toward Westminster. The wind rises again, carrying the scent of lavender. You whisper, almost without meaning to, "Thank you, Elizabeth, for teaching us that silence can speak." Then you leave the river behind, its murmuring waves, the wind and the echo of bells blending together. Every sound feels like a pulse from the past, and you know that in nights to come, when fog blankets the city and candles tremble within the abbey, her story will still go on. No one needs to open the tomb, because in truth it was never closed. It remains open in memory, in whispers, in the very silence of those still listening. You walk on, the city's hum fading behind you. The London night folds around you, gentle, weighty, like the hand of history itself resting softly on the shoulder of its newest storyteller. You stop in the middle of Westminster Bridge. The wind rises from the Thames, carrying with it a chill that bites through your coat, whipping your hair backward. Beneath your feet, the river flows on, as though 4 centuries have been nothing but a blink of its ancient eye. Above, Big Ben strikes 3 slow, resonant chimes, each one longer, heavier than on any other night. 3 breaths of time itself, announcing that another chapter is about to close. You look toward Westminster Abbey, where the golden lamps cast their glow across gray stone. There, beneath hundreds of tons of rock and lead, Elizabeth I still lies, untouched, unchallenged, undefined. Inside may be only bone or dust, or perhaps something that long ago transcended life and death altogether. But you realize now, it doesn't matter. Her immortality was never inside the lead. It lives in the silence she left behind. You recall everything you've seen and felt. The child who watched her mother be executed, the girl cornered by power, the queen trapped inside her own glory. A lifetime where every moment was observed, dissected, judged. And so, to survive, she turned herself into a story. No one could rewrite it if she was the final narrator. Perhaps that's why she wanted her tomb sealed in lead. Not to hide her remains, but to keep her word. If her life had been a stage, Her death would be the only curtain call she could fully control. One final bow without words, leaving the audience forever wondering, did she truly leave the stage, or is she still standing there, just behind the curtain? You smile, a faint, smoke-thin curve in the cold air. In a way, Elizabeth won. She triumphed over time, over death, and even over the world's curiosity. Who else has made humanity speak of them this much after 400 years of silence? Each generation adds another layer, another theory, another rumor, and through them all she continues to live, not in bone but in imagination. Historians still argue, tourists still flock to Westminster, the candles still burn, and each time one candle dies, another is lit. Perhaps that's the world's quiet way of saying, she's still here, we're still listening. You lift your gaze to the sky. The clouds have broken. The moon emerges, round, cold, pouring silver across the river. Its light spills over the abbey walls, turning them into a sheet of pale metal. In that glow, you imagine a woman standing at a window, white gown, high collar, a peacock fan in her hand. She gazes outward, not at you, but toward the river, where the same moon once shone on her 4 centuries ago. A gust of wind sweeps past, carrying once again that elusive scent of lavender. You breathe in deeply, and it feels as though time itself brushes against you. Perhaps it's just perfume from a passerby, perhaps not. But you don't try to explain, because if Elizabeth taught you anything, it's this: not every secret needs to be solved. You turn away, walking on through the glow of headlights and the hum of the modern city, while in your mind the abbey bells still echo, low, steady, like a good night whispered from the past. London is awake, yet you feel yourself slipping gently into a dream, where the rustle of silk, the hush of whispers, and the faint scent of lead powder all blur together. Then, as if spoken from somewhere within that dream, a voice rises, soft, proud, and distant. Silence is the last throne. You nod slightly, without fear, without question. The story has reached its ending, but its resonance hasn't. For legends never end. They only learn to whisper. And so, in the cool wind of the London night, you close your journey. 420 years have passed, and the Virgin Queen's tomb remains sealed, not because people fear what they might find, but because they fear losing what they already believe. You smile and murmur, "Sleep well, Elizabeth. The tomb may be closed, but your story never is." Then you walk away, leaving behind the slow, fading toll of Westminster's bells, steady and distant, like a lullaby from history itself, lulling you and the world into a deep sleep suspended between two shores, the past and eternity.